Again, we have a beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Ayin Beis. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Iyar. To thank Yona Shushie Ehrenfeld for dedicating all of the shiurim and drashos this month in memory of Yona's grandfather, Yosef ben Shmuel Aron, Zichron Livracha. Benjamin and Elys Wohl for dedicating the shiurim and drashos this month in memory of Moshe Chaim ben Tzvi Hirsch, Zichron Livracha. Our week of learning sponsors, Dr. Shmuel Robyn Korobkin, in commemoration of the first yahrzeit of Shmuel's father, Leonard Korobkin, Lipa ben Yechezkel HaKohen. Our day of learning sponsor, Naor and Chani Simhi, nishmas, Chaya, Malca, Bas Moshe Zalman, Halevi, Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a neshama. And also with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Ayin Beis 72. We are picking up on Ayin Aleph Amud Beis 71b, and we left off. Let's actually pick up at Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Bina, which is kind of in the middle of Amud Beis. It is, if you see Tosfos Lo Nitna Priyas Mila, it's right across in there in the Gemara, about 4 lines down. I'm Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Bina. But let's say again, we began this case yesterday, but let's just pick up from here again. Arel, so we'll say, remember again, Arel is our topic because halacha l'maisa, we were talking about the Mishnah that said that a Kohen who is in Arel cannot consume truma. So continuing along this same theme, I'm Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Bina. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Bina, Arel mekabel hazah. An interesting case here, both sides. On Arel, someone who is uncircumcised can become tar through the sprinkling of the ashes of the para aduma. So just to be clear, we're going to talk about 2 cases in today's daf. One is where the Arel is the sprinkler, and one is where the Aron is the, sprinkly, that's the receiver, right? So in this case, we're talking about the fact that you have an Arel who became tamei tumas meis. The only way to go ahead and purify oneself from contracting tumas meis, corpse tuma, is through the sprinkling of the waters of the paraduma. So what the Gemara is describing over here is the following case. You have a guy who's an Arel. But he became tamei tumas meis. So apparently the Havamina is, you would have thought that because he's an Arel, perhaps he cannot go ahead and overcome his tumas meis. Kamash malon, even though he's an Arel, you could sprinkle on him from the ashes of the para aduma. Now we'll say, how do we know this? So the Gemara says, if you take a look, first of all, look at Rashi just a moment. Arel, Yisrael shenitma b'meis, mikabel hazah mitar mitumaso. So if a person who's an Arel became tamei, you could sprinkle on him in order to remove his tumas meis. Ukishiyamol eino tzarech lachzor ulahazos va'ochal b'kachim. And I will say, now here's what's interesting. After he has his bris milah, you don't say that he has to repeat the sprinkling. So again, we don't say that someone who has the sprinkling done when he is an Arel, that sprinkling is ineffective. And I will say, how do we know this? I will say it's incredible, because we see this with our ancestors. Our ancestors were Arelim, they were uncircumcised, but yet they were sprinkled with the waters of the para aduma in their uncircumcised state, and they became tahar from tumas meis. Where do we see this? It also is in Sefer Yoshua. Shenemar, v'ha'am, alu min hayardin be'asar lachodesh. The nation, Jewish people, came up, crossed the Jordan on the 10th, be'asar lachodesh harishon, on the 10th of the first month. So Klal Yisrael comes in Teretz Yisrael on the 10th of Nisan. So Ba'asar Lamali, now they could not circumcise on the 10th of Nisan. Why couldn't they circumcise? Mishum Chulsha Da'archa. Because ultimately, we're going to discuss, there's a concept of a person is weakened from a journey and therefore cannot circumcise on the day of the journey. We'll say, by the way, we find this also with Moshe Rabbeinu, right? The fact that Moshe Rabbeinu waited to circumcise his son. I remember again, there's that whole episode where the Malach swallows up Moshe. Moshe has a whole calculation also about not circumcising the journey. So therefore, 10th of the month, when they come into Eretz Yisrael, they're not circumcising. So the Gemara says, well, let's analyze this. Hazas, so now what does that mean? So when did they circumcise? Right? When did they circumcise? sometime after the 10th. Sometime after the 10th. When? We'll see. So then, Rabbi say, remember again, what's going on over here? Now they have to have circumcised before when? Before when? Before the 14th. Because remember again, they have to eat Karban Pesach. So remember again, so Pesach is 4 days later. You're going to shech the Karban Pesach on the 14th. That day already they have to be circumcised. So they're circumcising sometime between the 10th and the 14th. Well, not the 10th, between the 11th and the 14th. Now watch this. In addition, I was saying, the Jews who came into Eretz Yisrael had tumas meis, as we'll discuss in just a moment. They are tummy tumas meis. Tumas meis requires sprinkling of the parah aduma. It is a 7-day purification process, and sprinkling must be done when? When? Days 3 and days 7. So the Gemara says, Hazah emas avid lahu. So we'll say, so let's play this out. If they're coming in on the 10th and they can't circumcise, the earliest they can circumcise is when? Is on the 11th, and sprinkling has to be done on days 3 and day 7. By definition, what does that tell us? What does that tell us? That they're getting sprinkled with the waters of paraduma while they are still uncircumcised. Or at least one of the sprinklings is being done while they are still uncircumcised. So the Gemara says, Hazah emas avid lahu, lav kishein arelim. It must be that they're being sprinkled with the waters while they are still arelim. Now, both say, so again, remember, the Gemara is backing into this. First of all, the Gemara is presupposing that the Jews were not circumcised. We'll discuss how we know that in just a moment. Let's take that as fact. Klal Yisrael is coming in on the 10th of the month. They're uncircumcised. They can't have bris milah on day 10 because that's the day of the journey. The earliest they're having it is day 11. Day 11. They have to offer up Karban Pesach and be circumcised by day number 14. They also need to be sprinkled with waters of parah aduma, which requires a 7-day purification process with sprinklings on day 3 and day 7, which means that at least one of the sprinklings is being done in an uncircumcised state. This gives proof to the fact that Gemara says that halacha l'maisen orel can be sprinkled with the waters of parah aduma. So Gemara says, 1 second. V'dilma lo ovid pesach klal. How do you know? Maybe they just didn't do Karban Pesach that year. In other words, maybe they didn't do Karban Pesach year 1. I must remember again, we didn't do Karban Pesach in the deserts, right? They did it once in the desert. So maybe they just didn't do it that first year either. Well, the only problem is the pasuk says they offered the Karban Pesach, right? So the Gemara is quoting over here from 2 different psukim. Vayachlu bnei Yisrael b'Gilgal, vayasu es haPesach b'Arba Yom lechodesh ba'erev ba'arvo siricho. Okay, maskef l'mar zutra v'dilma Pesach haba b'tuma haya. Maybe this was a different kind of Pesach. In other words, we'll say maybe this Pesach they did uncircumcised. In other words, we'll say maybe this was just an exception. In other words, this was such a unique circumstance that maybe it was a Pesach haba b'tuma. Now we'll say, I'm sorry, not uncircumcised, excuse me. Maybe it was a Pesach that they did in a state of tumah. Now we'll say, remember again, we have a concept of tumah hutra b'tzibor. So we're assuming that there was a sprinkling of the waters of paraduma. Maybe not. Maybe that year they did the Pesach in a state of ritual impurity. And therefore, again, they got bris milah, but there was no hazah. To which the Gemara says, only Rapapa, Tanya behedja. There's an explicit brayso. What does the brayso say? Malu v'tavlu va'asu pischein b'tara. Rabbi say at the end of the day, the brayso says explicitly, they did bris milah, they went to the mikvah, and ultimately that first year that they entered into Eretz Yisrael, they did their Karban Pesach in Eretz Yisrael right outside of Yericho in a state of ritual purity. So again, halacha l'maisa, just the Gemara saying, and this is very interesting, and both say the Rambam codifies this. Rambam codifies this, that if you have someone who's an orel, for whatever the reason, and he becomes ritually impure, and he wants to become purified from his orel status, halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and do the sprinkling of the parah aduma upon such an individual. And we don't say that his arelos blocks his ability to become ritually pure, which I will say goes back to a yisod in a hashkafic sense, goes back to a yisod that we spoke about yesterday. If you think about this in just a moment, you have 2 levels of tumah. You have 2 levels of tumah, right? What are the 2 levels of tumah in this case? Arelos, which we look at as almost like a form of tumah, and arla. Arelos and tumas meis. So the havamina is, what's the point of getting rid of tumas meis if you still have arelos, right? Or perhaps an inability, kamash malon. No, even if arelos is still there, you can still get rid of tumas meis. I will say, in a profound hashkafic level, it's not all or nothing in the pursuit of Tara, right? It's not all or nothing in the pursuit of ritual purity. If it was all or nothing in the pursuit of personalistic Tara, then most of us would simply remain tameh for the duration of our lives. Sometimes I can't fix everything. You say it differently. At no time can I fix everything, but almost at all times I can fix something. And sometimes we kind of come into this erroneous mindset that if I can't fix everything, then it's not worth doing anything, right? If I can't go ahead and render myself totally ritually pure, if I can't get rid of the arelos and the tumas meis, then what's the point of getting rid of any level of tumah? Kamash malon, no, life is not an all or nothing, right? The perfect is the enemy of the good. That at the end of the day, sometimes if you could take care of some problems, even if there are many others that still remain, that is still an incredible accomplishment. Incredible. But let's go back to Amarav Barav Yitzchak Amarav. Lo nitna priyas mila li Avram Avinu. Shneimar ba'isi Amar Hashem. So let's talk about this for just a moment. Bris Milah itself is comprised of really three different parts, but for our purposes, we'll talk about two. There's what we call Milah. Milah ultimately is the cutting of the foreskin, which is a thicker layer of upper skin. And then there's what the Gemara calls Priya. Priya is after you remove the foreskin, there's still a thinner membrane. That's the removal of that membrane. So the Gemara says over here, interestingly enough, that Priya, the removal of the thin membrane, was not given to Avram Avinu. That Avram Avinu's bris milah, and it sounds like Avram Avinu, not just Avram Avinu, but Avram Avinu, like through the generations up until Yoshua, really only had what we call milah, but didn't have priya, didn't necessarily have the removal of the thinner membrane. So the Gemara says, Shene Amar, Ba'isei Amar Hashem al Yoshua, Asei lecha charvos tsurim. So Rabbi said, listen to this. The passage that the Gemara is quoting over here is as follows. Ba'isei Amar Hashem al Yoshua, in that moment when Klal Yisrael came into Eretz Yisrael, Hashem says to Yoshua, Asei lecha charvos tsurim, make for yourself sharpened stones. For bris milah, sharpened stones, v'shuv mol es b'nei Yisrael shenis, and circumcise the Jewish people shenis. Then I will say, shenis means what? Second time. So it's interesting because again I will say, what's pashat pshat? What's pashat pshat? Pashat pshat is shenis refers to the fact when was the last time that we're going to see when was the last time that Klal Yisrael did a bris milah? Amazing. Last time we did a bris milah in Egypt. Before we left Mitzrayim. So shenis is that was the first time there was a national milah. Now we're going to, Hashem says to Yoshua, perform another national milah. The Gemara is also understanding that shenis means two brises. In other words, when you circumcise them, make sure that it's a double bris. What's a double bris? A double bris, again, is the foreskin, what we'll call the milah, and then also the thinner membrane. So the Gemara says, V'dilma hanach de la maho, d'chsiv, ki mulim hayu kala yotzim mina'am, ki yotzim v'chala ami yelodim. So maybe the passage means like this. Maybe shenis means ultimately that there were those who were circumcised and those who were uncircumcised. In other words, maybe coming into Eretz Yisrael, not all of the Jews were circumcised. Right? So maybe just shenis just means is referring to that group that was uncircumcised. Imkain my shuv. If that's the case, why does the pasuk say shuv again? Ella lav priya. Rather, it must be referring to priya, and it's telling us that halacha l'maisa again they had to remove the thinner membrane. Umay shenis, and ultimately, what does it mean? Second, la kushe sof mila letrilas mila. Shenis is it's really fascinating. The Gemara is telling us that shenis refers to the second stage of milah. That whereas the first stage of milah is the removal of the foreskin, right? What we'll call the upper thicker skin. The shenis, the second part, is the removal of the membrane. And what is the Gemara teaching us? What is the pasuk teaching us? It's coming to compare second stage of milah to the first stage of milah. Matrilas milah ma'akeves, just like the first stage of milah ultimately is ma'akev. Af sof mila ma'akvin bo. So I will say, just like the removal of the primary foreskin, and it is a necessary part of the mila, so too a removal of the membrane is a necessary part of the mila as well. Disnan, Elohina tzitzin ha'ma'akvin es hamila. So I will say, the Gemara talks about the tzitzin ma'akvin es hamila, which means if through the bris milah, or if after the bris milah, there are like tzitzin. Tzitzin are like little pieces of skin that are left on the makom milah. So we'll say, if there's enough of them left, or certain areas that they're left in, they could undermine the effectiveness of the milah. For example, basar hachofes rov ha'atara ve'nochal truma. If there is flesh, if there is skin left on the atara, right, which is the tip, ultimately, again, that could prevent the person, if he's a kohen, from eating truma, because he's considered an aral. We're talking about flesh. If there's skin that is left, that covers rov gof hashalatara, literally the majority of the height of the tip, that would go ahead and render a person an orel, even though, again, there's plenty of the foreskin that has been removed. If there's enough that's left that it covers the majority of the height, right, of the tip, ultimately, again, that undermines the effectiveness of the milah. Good. So Moshe says, here's what we have so far. Fact number one is that even if you're an orel, you could go ahead and be sprinkled with the waters of the para aduma, and that could go ahead and free you from your tumas meis. Fact number two, interestingly enough, and we'll say the proof to that was Yoshua and Klal Yisrael. Once we're talking about that, the Gemara also says, Priya, Mila is made up of two parts, removal of the upper foreskin and the removal of the membrane. Interestingly enough, the removal of the membrane only came into effect, apparently, with Yoshua's entry into Eretz Yisrael. Bris Mila beforehand just was comprised of what we call Mila, but did not have Priya. Interesting. We'll say also, we know historical facts. Klal Yisrael came in on the 10th of Nisan, and again, that was the first Karban Pesach performed in Old Klob in 40 years. So let's go weiter. We'll say a little bit more on this topic. Really fascinating. So Amarav Veitim Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Amarav. I'm sorry. Uba Midbar, second to last line. Uba Midbar. My time Lamo. Here's what's interesting. We're taking it for granted that Klal Yisrael did not do bris milah in the deserts. Why not? We'll say, which, by the way, if you think about it, is like overwhelmingly amazing. Bris milah is the most fundamental covenantal sign between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael, right? That's why, again, already in Avram Avinu, before Matan Torah, Avram Avinu is already circumcising. It's amazing to think Klal Yisrael does milah as a way of leaving Mitzrayim, right? Milah was part of the exit ticket, right? It was part of that covenantal sign. And then for 4 decades, no one's doing bris milah, which is wonderful. Say, in other words, no other time in the history of the Jewish people have you ever had a lapse in a mitzvah like that. For 4 decades, the Gemara says, by the way, why aren't they doing milah in the desert? So the Gemara says, so we'll say, this goes back to what we said before. One possibility was because of travel. So I will say, since again the 40 years in the desert, although Rashi in the beginning of Dvarim points out to us, sometimes we have this image of Klal Yisrael being this nomadic people, right, trudging all along the desert. We actually traveled very little over the course of our time in the desert. We were stationary most of the time, but nevertheless, it was a quote-unquote nomadic existence. So because it was a nomadic existence, there's chulsha da'archa, literally weakness of the journey. We don't give bris milah in a state of journey. So that's one possibility. We'll say other possibility, top of ayin beis, mishum delo noshev lehu ruach tzvonis. This is incredible. I will say because all the time that we were in the desert, the northern wind did not blow. Now look at Rashi. Ruach tzvonis, Rashi says, nocha. The Ruach Tzvonis is a calming wind. Lo chama v'lo tzonenes v'chama zorachas. So I will say the northern wind, it's not hot, it's not cold, and it allows the sun to shine. So apparently the presence of the northern wind is necessary, has therapeutic powers, and is helpful for when there is bris milah. So all the years that we were in the desert, there was no northern wind. So the Gemara says, Desanya, why was there no northern wind? Desanya, all the 40 years we were in the desert, lo nashva lahem ruach tzvonis. The northern wind did not blow. My taima, I will say, what's the reason for that? Rabbi say one possibility was we were punished. Now Rabbi say nizufin means rebuked. We were rebuked by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the rebuke took one of the ways in which the rebuke took form was no northern wind. No northern wind. Rabbi say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Ibay say mishum nizufin, third line down, Rashi says, so first of all, I want to point out, look at Rashi. Lo noshba lahem ruach tzfonis bayom, v'lo zorcha chama aleim. Rabbi say, here's what's amazing. The sun was never, right, they never saw the sun for 40 years. Right? So because the northern wind never blew, therefore by definition, there was the sun's rays were not upon them. Now, why did this happen? Possibility one is Hashem was upset. Hashem was angry. They were rebuked. Why? Look at Rashi. Mimaisa ha'egel v'lo haya ru'uyin la'ar noga. Rabbi said, listen to this. Hashem was upset because of the egel, because of the golden calf, and because as a result of the golden calf, they did not receive the sun's rays. They did not receive the sun's rays. Now, I'll point out something very interesting. If you take a quick look to the left at Tosfos says, Nezufin hayu, Amra benu Yitzchak mimase meraglim, v'lo kimoshe pirish bekuntrus mimaise ha'egel. So Tosfos disagrees. Tosfos says, no, but Tosfos agrees, they did not have a northern wind, and therefore, again, there was no sunlight during the 40 years in the desert, but not like Rashi. Rashi says it was a result of Maisa Egel. Tosfos says it wasn't the Egel, it was the Meraglim. It was the Meraglim. So listen to this, he goes on, he says, Shari Machalem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'amr lahem salachti, she'achar kach na'aseh mishkan, v'hishra shchinasa b'neihem. Why, says Tosfos? Because Hashem forgave us for the Egel. Hashem forgave us for the Egel. What's the raya? The raya is we built a mishkan, va'asuli mikdash, v'shachanti b'socham. Hashem says he'll dwell within us. So therefore Tosfos says it can't be the egel, that's to be the meraglim. I asked the chasam sofer, but Hashem forgave us for the meraglim also, right? To which the chasam sofer says the forgiveness for the meraglim is not the same as the forgiveness for the egel. For the egel, there was a certain degree of complete forgiveness. For the meraglim, I will say, for the chita meraglim, there was an element of partial forgiveness. But the residual effect of the chita meraglim, says the chasam sofer, is felt to this day. Which is also just interesting, by the way, in the world of forgiveness, how there's different levels of forgiveness. As we know, it's in our own lives. Sometimes someone wrongs you, and you could fully forgive, b'leiv shalim. Other times, you forgive, but there is still a strong residual impact from the act. I don't bear animosity. I'm not angry at you, but I don't like you, right? I don't like you, or I really want nothing to do with you. So it's a forgiveness with the residual impact. So it's amazing to see how these two models of forgiveness are modeled by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's Cheta Egel, which represents a complete absolution, complete forgiveness. And then there's Cheta Meraglim. I forgive you, I love you, but I'm really hurt by what you did. And that trauma to the relationship is not healed. It's not healed. And it's not healed, we'll say incredible, to this very day. Okay, in any event. So we'll say, whichever Chet it was, the result was no Ruach Tzfonis, no northern wind, therefore no sun. And because no northern wind, no sun, Mila would have been dangerous. So the Gemara says, so again, why is there no northern wind? Either because it's a form of rebuke. But say this is actually very interesting. The other possibility is, you know why there was no northern wind? Because we'll say, what does wind do? It scatters clouds. Kadosh Baruch Hu was surrounding us with clouds. Those clouds were there for our protection. And therefore, again, if there was a northern wind, the protective clouds would have been scattered. And I will say, it's such a fascinating statement because the clouds were miraculous, right? So what do you mean the northern wind would have scattered them? Okay, I'll just point out how incredible is this. I'll say sometimes things happen in life, and it's interesting to see how the same event could be looked at as a form of rebuke or a form of bracha. So there's no northern wind, and therefore, again, the sun doesn't break through the cloud cover. Is that a form of divine rebuke for the chatam we've committed? or at the end of the day, is it a form of bracha? Hashem wants to protect us, right? He wants to keep the cloud cover around us because that was our form of protection from natural elements and from external enemies during our time in the desert. And I'll say, what a musar, because there's so many times in life that things happen to us, and sometimes we automatically look at them through a particular lens. But it is interesting to see how the various events in life can maybe be understood even in dramatically opposite ways. Okay, in any event, the Gemara goes weiter. So we'll say, Hilchach. So we'll say, so again, here's what we have. Here's what we know. Klal Yisrael did not circumcise in the desert. That's what we know. There was no bris milah in the desert. That's for sure. Why? Because there was no ruach tzifonis. And because no ruach tzifonis, therefore, again, no sunlight. They were covered by, we'll say, cloud cover for 40 years. Why was there no ruach tzifonis? So again, Rabbi say that seems to be machlokes. Either there was no ruach tzifonis, either because they were nizufim, right? Ibai Sema, because ultimately again nizufim, or so either because it was a form of rebuke or it was a form of protection. Hashem didn't want to scatter the clouds. Whatever the reason, halacha l'maisa, there was no milah in the midbar. So for 40 years, Rabbi say, no milah, which means the first national milah that occurred is when we entered into Eretz Yisrael with Yoshua. Incredible. So Rabbi says it's actually very interesting. Papa says, Hilchach. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, yoma de'iva v'yoma deshusa, lo mahalinan bei, v'lo misarchinan bei. So Rabbi says, the Gemara says something absolutely amazing. The Gemara says, therefore, what do you see from here? One should not do a bris milah on a cloudy day. That's yoma de'iva, cloudy day. And Yom Deshusa is a day in which the southern wind blows. Because the southern wind, Rashi points out over here, Vihikasha, is a difficult wind. So therefore, again, we don't do bris milah on cloudy days and southern wind days. But we do. I'll say, by the way, Melomar Zachin also means we don't do bloodletting. V'ha'idna didashu beirabim shomer pesayim Hashem. So we'll say, this is such a fascinating sugya in and of itself, which we're not going to have time to get into. But I will say there's a concept that there are certain things that may be inherently dangerous. But once ultimately, again, they're done, it's called dashu beirabim. Since it's saying that people do, there's an element of shomer pesayim Hashem. Hashem protects simple people. In other words, I will say, this is an extreme example, but just to give you, like, if you take a look, like, there is a certain statistical danger associated with driving, or a certain statistical danger associated with flying. I have a mitzvah, I have to watch, I have to be careful with my health, I have to be careful with my life. I say, how am I allowed to engage in activities that have a certain level of inherent danger? And I will say, what's the answer? The answer is that when you see that there is a practice that normal people engage in, that's called dashu beirabim. Literally, the public has trampled upon it. So once you see a practice that people engage in, there is assumed to be a certain level of divine protection. Shomer pesayim Hashem. So the Gemara says, what are you going to do? We're going to start looking for days in which there's a northern wind. There's a northern wind, and the biometric pressure is this, and the temperature is between 65 and 70, right? And there's no southerly wind. Come on, we can't do it. You see, both say the desert was a very controlled situation, right? So you could do certain things or not do certain things there. But again, the Gemara says this has become dashu beirabim. People do bris milah on any type of day with any type of weather, and therefore shomer pesayim Hashem goes ahead and watches over simple people. Which I will say also, we have to move back there, but there's so much to say about this that sometimes the simpler we are in our Yiddishkeit, and the simpler we are in our emunah, and the simpler we are in our devekos b'Hashem, the greater level of relationship we get to enjoy. Because sometimes just a simple willingness to commit to Ribbono Shalom without deep theological philosophies or understanding or recognition that I'm not going to understand things, but I give myself over to Ribbono Shalom. I'm zocha to a shmiri, I'm zocha to an additional level of divine providence and protection. Incredible. Tan Rabbanan. We'll say it's incredible. All 40 years that we were in the desert, Lo haya yom shelo nashbu bo ruach tzfonis b'chatzi halayla. So said, this is wild. We just got finished saying that all the years in the desert, there was no northern wind. Now the Gemara says all 40 years that we were in the desert, the northern wind blew every day at midnight. At midnight. Now both say that this is interesting. Now the Gemara says, because how do you know this? Because the pasuk says at midnight Hashem did makas bechoros. Okay, Hashem did makas bechoros ruach tzefonos. What's the one thing have to do with the other? My Talmudah hakamash malon de isratzon milsehi. The both say this is incredible. The fact that Hashem did makas bechoros at midnight, and again that was the culmination of our exodus from Egypt, indicates that's Rabbi say the idea of Eis Ratzon. Rabbi say Eis Ratzon means that there are some times that lend themselves a bit more to divine salvation. Eis Ratzon, right? Literally a time of divine goodwill. So the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did Makos Bechoros at Chatzos indicates to us that Chatzos is a time that is ripe for divine mercy. It becomes an Eis Ratzon, a time of divine goodwill. And therefore, again, the Gemara says, just like again that happened in Mitzrayim, it must have happened every night in the desert as well, so that there was a little bit of a northern wind every night at Chatzos. So I will say, it's possible that the Gemara is just reflecting two different opinions about what happened in Ruach Tzefonis, or even the opinion who said that Ruach Tzefonis did not blow. It didn't blow by day. But it blew for a little bit at night, highlighting the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was upset with us, but ultimately, again, still the Ruach Tzefonis. We look at Rashi, Eis Ratzon Milsehi, V'cheven dechatzos halayla Eis Ratzon havi l'makos bechoros, havinami Eis Ratzon l'Ruach Tzefonis. Since Chatzos was established as an Eis Ratzon, ultimately for Makos Bechoros, therefore it became an Eis Ratzon ultimately for Ruach Tzefonis as well. Ve'im l'chayom sh'Ruach Tzefonis in menashev v'sbo b'chatzi halayla, v'zeu simen l'David kinor, v'zeu haya simen l'David kinor talilo l'malas memitaso v'nikva klapei tzafon. So I will say, interestingly enough, the Gemara said David HaMelech used to hang a harp above his bed, and it was his alarm clock, because the Ruach Tzefonos would blow at Chatzos and would make music on the strings of the harp. If you skip down a little bit in Rashi says over here, Hy'd shafilu osan mem shanav dinezufim hayu v'lo nishba v'noshbulu b'yamim nashbulu b'chatzos laila mishum de'es ratzonu. I will say, listen to this. Even though we just got finished saying that the Ruach Tzefonos, the northern wind, did not blow by day, so why is it blowing at Chatzos at night? To show that even when Hashem is angry at us, even when He's angry, He still loves us. Just like a parent, right? The parent can be very angry at a child, but at the end of the day, the love that the parent has for the child is absolutely wholly intact. Hashem is angry at us, He's upset at us. Something, but Lamaisa, the love is still intact. How did He show us that the love is still intact? By having the northern wind blow at Chatzos. At Chatzos. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Amrav Huna, Divar Torah, both say, okay, so fine, we're done with this. Both say, now another interesting discussion when it comes to Milah. Listen to this. Amrav Huna, Divar Torah, Mashuch Ochel B'Truma. So both listen to this. A Mashuch. What's a Mashuch? Look at Rashi. Mahol Shenim Shecha Arlasa V'Kista Esatara. So I will say, this is a case of a person who had bris milah, but then some of the other skin in the makom ha'ever was stretched, and therefore the skin hangs down over the atara, over the tip. So a person looks uncircumcised. That's the case of Masha. So I will say, so just to be clear, the person is circumcised, but again, because the skin, other skin had become stretched, therefore, halacha l'maisa, he looks uncircumcised. So what's his status? So if Huna says, mid'araisa, such a person could eat truma, is not an aral. U'midivreim gazra Allah mipnei shenira k'aral. But midrabanan, Chazal said, such a person should not be able to eat truma because he looks like an aral. So we'll say, let's analyze this. Meisvei, mashuch sarach she'imo, Brisa says, a mashuch has to have a milah. In other words, he has to cut away the excess skin. To which we'll say, it sounds like mid'araisa. To which we'll say, no, midrabanan. Midrabanan, he needs to cut away the excess skin so that he should not look like he is an oral. V'tikarli my karla. So we'll say, the one who posed the question, what was his havamina? Hatzarech katani. The pasuk says you have to. We'll say, so tzarech sounds like Dirabanan. So what's the havamina of the question to make it sound like that is chayv daraisa? Here we go. Katay b'seifa. His mistake was what was with the end of the brayso. So I was the end of the brayso. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer, lo yimo mipnei shesakane hilo. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we don't want people doing a second milah, right? Because doing a second milah, even on stretched skin, could pose a potential sakana. And I will say, what's the sakana? The sakana is, if you end up cutting in the wrong place, Rashi says you can become a krus shavcha, right? I will say, krus shavcha is someone, again, where the semen, right, the zera does not shoot out with force. Such a person is not permitted to go out and marry into the normative pool. So Rabbi Yehuda essentially says, listen, if you had a bris milah, we're done. The fact that you have excess skin that covers the atar, that covers the tip, and makes you look like an RL, leave it alone. The Gemara says, 1 second, it's not sakana. V'halo harbe malu bimei ben koziba. Wow. Rabbi says the Gemara, there were many people who cut away excess skin, who had bris milah, but then cut away excess skin, essentially another milah, during the days of bar koziba. We'll say bar koziba is bar kochva. What is it referring to? We'll say, look at Rashi, this is incredible. Bimei ben koziba, she mashchum ovdei kochavim ba'ones bekrach beitar. We'll say, listen to this. When the Romans were in charge of beitar, they legislated upon the Jews no bris milah. And for those Jews who had bris milah, they forcibly stretched the skin of these Jews to make it so that the skin would hang down over the tip, over the makom milah, and make them look uncircumcised. When there was the Bar Kochva revolt, remember Bar Kochva led the revolt against the Romans, and he was successful for holding on to Beitar for 2.5 years. One of the first orders of business is all the men, quote unquote, recircumcise themselves. I will say, just to be clear, it's not actually a recircumcision. What they're doing is they're cutting away excess skin to allow the makom milah to be seen. So they did this, and there wasn't a sakana, there was no danger. So the raya was they were able to have children afterwards. Volidu banu mubano shneimar himo yimo afilu mea pamim. The pasuk says himo yimo, which means you have to circumcise as many times as it takes. V'omer ves brisi hefer l'rabos es hamashoch. And the pasuk says they have annulled my covenant. This refers to someone who purposely extends the skin over the makom milah to make himself look like he's uncircumcised. My va'omer v'chitema hai himo yimo l'rabos titzan amakvin es hamila. Maybe you'll say himo yimo comes to teach you that if you left behind shreds of skin that could validate the milah, tashmas brisi hefer l'rabos es hamashoch. Usavar midikanos of leashas kra doraisi. So we'll say originally, ultimately he thought that because the Gemara is bringing a pasuk, therefore it must be that the obligation of a mashuch to go in and cut away excess skin is a din daraisa. Velohi, ultimately this is not true. Midrabanan is simply midrabanan ukra asmachta ba'ama, and the pasuk is an asmachta. So I will say this is how we paskin halacha l'maisa, that ultimately a mashuch. So I will say, so to be clear, a mashuch is a man who had a bris milah. Right? What happened? Skin became extended. Skin became stretched, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And now the skin hangs down, covers the makom milah to make him look like he is uncircumcised. Mid oraisa, such a person does not need to do anything. Mid rabbanan, he has to cut away the excess skin in order to make himself look totally circumcised, that he should not look like an aral. So the oraisa, fine. Mid rabbanan, cut away the extra skin. Says the Gemara, Meses raise a kasha. Here we go. Tumtum eino ochel b'truma. A tumtum. I will say, and I remember again, who's the tumtum? This is a person whose sexual organs are covered by a membrane. He's not allowed to eat truma. Then I will say, why is he not allowed to eat truma? Let's think about this. Why is he not allowed to eat truma? Because he may be a man, and if he's a man, then what? He's uncircumcised, right? Excuse me. He's an oral. So he's not allowed to eat truma. Eino ochel b'truma. Nashav, his wives, right? Avadav, his servants. We'll talk about his wives in just a moment. Avadav, his servants. Ochlin, they're allowed to eat. They're allowed to eat. Mashuch, here we go. What about a mashuch? The nola kushumo, or someone who's born circumcised. Hare elu ochlin. They're allowed to eat truma. They're allowed to eat truma. Androgynous, ochel truma. An androgynous can eat truma. Vein ochel b'kachim. But an androgynous can't eat kachim, can't eat karbanos, because an androgynous may be a woman. Right? Tumtum. Eino ochel lo b'truma v'lo b'kachim. A tumtum can't eat truma, nor can he eat kachim. So the Gemara says, katani mihas. So we'll say, let's leave out everyone else right now. Who we focused on? we're all about mashach all the time. All mashach all the time. So the Gemara says, Katani mihas, mashach, v'nolad kishumal, hare elu ochlin. I will say, what do you see from here? You see from here that Allah Chalamaisa, a mashach, right, and someone who is born circumcised are able to eat truma. So I will say, what this sounds like is that halacha l'maisa, a mashach doesn't have to do anything. Doesn't have to do anything. So tiyufta de Rafuna tiyufta. This refutes Rafuna because Rafuna said that a mashach does have to go ahead and cut away the excess skin. So tiyufta de Rafuna tiyufta. Rabbi say this seems to go ahead and refute the position of Rafuna. So Rabbi say even though the Gemara sounds like it's refuting the position of Rafuna, in fact we paskin lahalacha like Rafuna, namely midda oraisa. The mashach is absolutely fine. He is considered to be circumcised. Midrabanan, we want him to cut away the excess skin so that he should not look like an orel. Good. So we'll say, let's go back to this. Amar Mar, tumtum eno ochel b'truma, nosha v'avadim ochlim. So we'll say, so the Brisa said, a tumtum is not permitted to eat truma, but his wives can eat truma. So the Gemara says, nashav l'tumtum minnale, how is a tumtum able to get married? Ilema de Kaddish. So maybe you'll say, well, in other words, he went over to a woman and he gave her kiddushin. Okay, desanya tumtum shekidesh kiddush of kiddushin. So the niskadesh kiddush of kiddushin. Eimar lechumra. Look, because we learned that Allah lamaisa, even though a tumtum should not get married, right? If he does, his kiddushin is effective. To which the Gemara says, Eimar da amar lechumra. So what does it mean when we say that it's kiddusha is kiddusha? We'll say, what does that mean? That he has to give his wife a get, right? L'chumra, but l'kula, to say that he can go in and get married and that his wife is going to eat truma, that you can't say. Miyar minon, safek ishahu. We'll say at the end of the day, a tumtum is a safek isha. The ein isha miskadesh as isha. Popular, right? Contrary to popular opinion. Right? We'll say, so again, it's halacha l'maisa. A woman can't marry a woman, right? So halacha l'maisa again, the Gemara says over here. So the tumtum is a safek isha. And therefore again, isha cannot marry another isha. Rabaye, what's the case? Kishe beitzav nikaros. This is interesting, Abba saying. So a different case of tumtum. This is a case of where again his testicles are outside of the membrane, but again the aver is inside. So Abba say in this case over here, he's really a man. Right? In other words, we know he's a man. Problem is he's an orel, right? Because we can't circumcise him. To which the Gemara says, Rava Amar Main Nashav. So we'll say that's Abaye's case. Abaye's case, that's the case of tumtum who could be married. So technically speaking, if a tumtum like that, where beitzav, right, the beitzim are seen, se'enachinami, in that case, he could technically be mekadesh and isha. Rava says, no, Main Nashav. What's the case ultimately again of his wives? Imo. It's not about his wife, it's about his mother. Imo pshita. So I don't understand. We'll say, so again, what is he talking about? Let's say again, his mother is a Bas Yisrael who married a Kohen. They have a child, a son. That son is a tumtum. So the tumtum allows his mother to go and eat truma. Okay, so says pshita. What's the chiddush? So what would you have thought? Molid machil she'ein molid eno machil. You might have thought that it's maybe only a son who's capable of having his own children, that ultimately allows his mother to eat truma, but a child who's incapable of having children precludes his mother from eating truma. Kamash malam, that's not the case. Kamash malam will say any offspring allows the Bas Yisrael mother to continue to eat truma, even if that child can't have children of his own. So let's analyze. Tashma, tumtum eno ochal lo b'truma v'lo b'kadshim. Tumtum can't eat truma and can't eat kadshim. Bishlam, so let's analyze. Bishlama la'abaye tanaresh arel vadai vikatani seifa safek arel. So I'll say according to Abaye, it's two different cases. First case is about an arel vadai, which I will say that's the case ultimately where the beitzim are on the outside, right? We know it's a man, and therefore we know that his problem is that he's an arel. And ultimately, again, the seifa is talking about a case of safek arel. We'll say what's the case of safek arel? Your classic tumtum. We'll say who's your classic tumtum? All sexual organs are inside the membrane. We have no idea about this guy. Two different cases. El Rava, tumtum de seifa lamli. But according to Rava, why does the Brisa need to mention tumtum at the end again? My tumtum orel. What's a tumtum? It could be again, the Brisa is using the lashon ultimately of orel. Hashta safek orel lo achel vade orel achel. So I don't understand. If you already told me that a safek orel doesn't eat truma, then doesn't it go without saying that a vadei arel is not going to eat truma? So the Gemara says, matam kamer. It's matam tumtum eino ochel b'truma. The Bryce is just simply explaining itself. Why is it that a tumtum can't eat truma? My time eino right. Mipnei shesafek arelu. Ultimately, because he is a safek arel, va'arel eino ochel lo b'truma v'lo b'kachim, and an arel ultimately again can't eat by truma or by kachim. Aylema ketanai. So maybe this whole thing is a whole machlokes tanai. We're going back now. We're going back now to Mashach. We're back to Mashach. Maybe Mashach, the status of a Mashach, is in and of itself a machlokes tanaim. Here we go. So the Gemara says, so why? Mashach, v'nolik kishumal, if you have a Mashach, I will say, remember again, Mashach, the guy was circumcised, but the skin is extended, or nolik kishumal, the gershin is gari kishumal, or you have a ger, and I will say, here's an interesting case. What about a person who converts and he's already circumcised? Rashi says, for example, so we saw in yesterday's daf, an Arabi, right, an Arab, or Givonim, they were doing Mila, so they converted once they already had a bris Mila. The Katan Sha'avar Zmano, or a Katan Rabbosai after the 8th day passed, he still haven't given him a Mila. Ushar Kalani Mulim, and all other circumcised people. La Suye Mish Yeshlo Shtei Arelos, and this comes to include someone who has 2 foreskins. Eina Nimulin Ella Bayom. Rabbosai, all of these people could only be circumcised by day. So I was supposed to say, so again, everyone we just mentioned, including the Mashach, requires a bris milah, and the milah could only be done by day. Rabbi Shimon says, no. Bismano, when the milah is being done in the appropriate time, so we'll say, let's say, for example, 8th day, Eini mulin ela bayom. Then you only do bris milah by day. Shelo bismano, when the milah is not being done in its appropriate time, nimulin bayom ubalayla. Then milah could be done anytime. Shrabosai, what's going on over here? My love b'hakameth. Shrabosai, aren't they arguing at the following point? The mar savar. Shrabosai, so let's just zero in on one case over here. Right? So first opinion says that Allah Chalamaisa, a mashach requires a milah. Right, a milah, and Abba say, by the way, you know when we call it a milah, it's not really a milah, right? Because milah specifically refers to removal of foreskin. In this case, when we say the mashach needs a milah, what's being removed? Right, stretched skin, extra skin. But again, remember to be clear, it's not. There's no foreskin. The foreskin is gone. So we'll say so first opinion the Brisa says a mashach has to have a milah, and the milah has to be done by day. The second opinion, which was Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, holds yes, a mashach needs a milah, but that milah could be done when? Anytime. So what are they arguing about? My labaka meflagi, demar savar mashach da'oraisa, umar savar mashach d'rabanan. Wow, here's the machlokes. The opinion that says that a mashach has to have a milah by day tells you that what? His milah is da'oraisa. And the other opinion that says a mashach can have a milah anytime, that's a milah d'rabanan. To which someone says, v'tizbara, well, okay, that works for Mashach. What about the other cases? V'tizbara, katan sha'avar zmano, mi ikalamandar m'drabanan. We'll say, but if you have a katan, we'll say, you have a situation where the 8th day passed, and you didn't give the baby a milah, for whatever the reason, right? But not a health reason. You just didn't get around to it. You couldn't find them all, whatever it is. Does anyone say that a baby past the 8th day is not a din d'oraisa? Ella, dekuli alma mashach d'rabanan. You have to say everyone holds that a mashach has a chi of milah, but it's a chi of milah midrabanan, like we saw Rav Huna. The katan sha'avar zmano doraisa. And everyone also gives Rabbosai that even if a baby didn't get his bris milah on the 8th day, there is still, of course, a biblical obligation to give that baby a bris milah. So what's the machlokes? Listen to this. Here's the argument. Mar savar darshinan ubayom, umar savar lo darshinan ubayom. Wow. Here's the machlokes Rabbosai. The pasuk, when it speaks out bris milah, says, ubayom hashmini imal basar loso. And on the 8th day, you shall circumcise. Rabbosai, one opinion, darshins ubayom. Look at Rashi. First Rashi on the daf. Mar savar ubayom. Vav yisir v'damatzil michtav bayom hashmini yimal. Uksif ubayom la'asuye milah shelo bismana. So Rabbosai, listen to this. The pasuk could have just said bayom hashmini. What is ubayom? So first opinion says, ubayom teaches me that whenever you're doing milah has to be done when? On the day, during the day, right? Whether it's a milah bismana, milah shelo bismana, milah d'oraisa, milah midrabanan. The milah only takes place by day. So one opinion darshans ubayom, and Umar Savar, the other opinion says, no, we don't darshan ubayom. And ubayom, look at Rashi. So Rabbi say, ubayom hashmini teaches me, when Milah is done on the 8th day, that's the Milah that has to be done by day. But for any other Milah, either a Milah taking place after the 8th day, or Milah for a Mashuch, those Milos could take place when? Anytime, by day and by night. Ki hadiyas Rabbi Yochanan the Kadarish. So let's listen to this. Rabbi Yochanan was once saying in Darshaning, no sir. It's actually an interesting similar case. No sir. Now remember again, what's no sir? You have a carbon, you have leftover carbonic material, right? Leftover meat. So what's the halacha? You have to burn it. No sir bismano, eno nisraf elabayom. So we'll say no sir in its appointed time. Now we'll say, what does that mean? So remember again, let's say you could eat a particular carbon for 2 days and 1 night, for argument's sake. Once the second day finishes, now it's no sir. That's bismano. So no sir bismano, eno nisraf elabayom, is only burnt by day. Shelo bismano, but if you leave no sir over even longer, right? Then what? Nisraf bein bayom bein balayla. You could burn it by day and by night. So we'll say, you see a similar, Rabbi Yochanan over here is advancing a similar concept, which means when something has a window, if you're performing it in its prescribed window, then what? Then it has to be done in that particular time. Once you've exited the window, it can be done anytime. So nosar should be burnt immediately by day. The first time it becomes nosar. But if for some reason you didn't burn it that first day, then you could burn it both by day and by night. We're comparing that to Milah. Milah has to be done by day on the 8th day. Once you're post 8th day, or again, you're a case of a mashuch, then halacha lamaisa, you could do Milah by day or by night. Ve'isir Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Lazar went ahead and raised the question to Rabbi Yochanan, Ein li ela nima l'shmini, she'ein nima ela bayom. So we'll say, so Rabbi Lazar before said, but 1 second, I only know, for example, bris milah on 8th day that has to be done by day. Minayim l'rabos l'tisha la sara la chadasar l'shnei masar minayin. How do I know? Says Rabbi Lazar. Says Rabbi Lazar, we just quoted before. Rabbi Lazar, right? How do I know that halacha l'maisa, that even if the milah is being done on the 9th day, the 10th, 11th, 12th, that it also has to be done by day? So the Jewish Gemara says, Talmud lomar ubayom. Right, pasuk ubayom. So both say, so Rabbi Lazar is pushing back on Rabbi Yochanan, right? Pushing back on Rabbi Yochanan, and ultimately says, Rabbi Yochanan, you're saying that sometimes having to do something by day only applies when you're doing it in the right time. Rabbi Lazar says, I'll tell you that's not true. For example, by Milah, ubayom teaches me that even if you're post 8th day, you still have to do the Milah by day. Fa'afilu man delo darish vav vehei darish. And halacha l'maisa, even the ones who don't normally darshan a vav, an extra vav, or an extra hey, will agree to this drush of ubayom. Ishtik. So also Rabbi Yochanan was silence, because he felt that Rabbi Lazar was saying good. Basar dinafik amrli Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. So ultimately after he went out, Rabbi Yochanan said to Reish Lakish, Ra'isi leben pidas. I saw Rabbi Lazar ben pidas Rabbi Lazar. Ra'isi leben pidas sheyoshev v'darish kimoshe mipi agvura. So let's listen to this. Rabbi Yochanan was so overwhelmed by Rabbi Lazar's wisdom, right, and Rabbi Lazar's mastery. He said, I saw Ben Pedas, and he was sitting and darshaning. It must have been, the way I saw him must have been the way that Moshe Rabbeinu looked when he was learning the Torah in Har Sinai before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What a compliment. Amar li Reish Lakish, Didehu, do you think that Rabbi Lazar is saying over his own Torah? Mas nisehi. It's a braisa. Right? In other words, yeah, he's good. Don't get me wrong. The guy's good, right? But at the end of the day, it's not his own Torah that he's giving over. This is a masni, so we learn this. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan, really? Heicha tanala, where could I find this? Right? Where could I find this? But Torah's Kohanim. It's in Torah's Kohanim. So Nafak, Rabbi Yochanan went out. Tanya bitlasa yomi. Rabbi Yochanan learned the entire Torah's Kohanim, Rabbi say in 3 days. Entire Torah's Kohanim in 3 days. V'savra bitlar siyachi, and he mastered it in 3 months. Right? He learned the initial material in 3 days, and he mastered it in 3 months. I'm Rabbi Lazar. So we'll say, so therefore, what you see over here is, you see Rabbi Lazar ben Pedas, right? Rabbi Lazar ben Pedas coming along and pushing back on Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan kind of espousing this idea that something only has to be done by day when it's being done in its original window. But once you leave the original window, then it can be done by day and by night. And we wanted to apply this to Bris Milah. Rabbi Lazar ben Pedas just pushing back and saying, that's not true. That's not true. And even if it's true by Nosar, it's not going to be true by Bris Milah. Because by Bris Milah, what do you have? Ubayom hashmini. And that ubayom at the end of the day, that Ubayom teaches us that Mila must always be done by day. Mila must always be done by day. Halacha l'maisa again. Halacha l'maisa. Even if it's post the 8th day, it still has to be done by day. So we'll stop over here for today. We're going to pick up again. I'll just mention this. I'll just read it. Well, we're going to pick up now just with the bookend case, right? And the bookend case, ultimately, we started with an RL going ahead and right being sprinkled upon. Now we're going to speak about again the case of an RL actually doing the sprinkling. Pick up with that case. And I will say, shkoyach.